00 or chapter 27. The bamboo was extremely heavy, and he was carrying 10 stalks. Couple that with the fact that he was climbing a mountain, and soon by the Alcan was huffing and puffing. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that he was in a really unfair situation. I began to practice immortal cultivation, because I want to live forever. Why the heck would I go around fighting and killing, huh? This bamboo could obviously grow a bit taller, but right now I need those merit points. The more he thought about the situation, the more annoyed he got at the unfairness of it all. Sighing, he hefted his spirit winter bamboo as he hiked up the mountain path. Currently, quite a large group of Outer Sect disciples was gathered outside of Fragrant Cloud Peak's missions office, hands filled with various medicinal plants, which they would exchange for merit points. A Fragrant Cloud Peak elder was present to inspect the items being handed in. The amount of merit points given as a reward depended on the quality of the items handed in. Just outside of the building itself was a wide, flat boulder upon which a ruddy-faced, white-haired old man sat cross-legged. A seemingly endless line of disciples stretched out in front of him, and everyone in line had spirit plants clutched in hand. When the old man gave his appraisal, a young assistant off to the side would record the information and dole out the merit points. Not bad, this watermouse orchid already has 4 petals, made great item. This woodbine ginseng is a bit too dark, and the earth-type power is too strong. It's completely out of balance. Sorry, it doesn't meet the requirements. Circling about overhead was a flock of elegant 5-colored phoenixes, each one more than 3 meters long. Occasionally, they would make melodious calls that rang out in the area. There were spirit pets belonging to the elder, who sat there, and whenever the appointed day came to hand in plants and vegetation, the birds would come along with him. They were, of course, the subject of much envy on the part of the Outer Sect disciples. The elder's cultivation base was in the foundation establishment stage, and was clearly beyond the ordinary. Although his overall skill with spirit medicines didn't match up to Laking House, he was still very famous in the sect. Furthermore, his obsession with the Tao of medicines had reached a frightening level that even Laking Uldn and opposed to equal. Many people even said that if a third master apothecary ever appeared in the Eastwood continent, then it would definitely be this very Elder Zoo. There was one particular young man in the line who wasn't and opposed to very handsome, but stood tall and straight. When he reached Elder Zoo, he clasped hands and bowed respectfully. Greetings, Elder Zoo, it's me, Chen Xian. When the other Outer Sect disciples in the area heard the young man and opposed's name, they all looked over curiously. Oh, so his elder brother Chen Xian. I heard that he and oppose as quite gifted when it comes to growing spirit plants. I heard that too. Ever since Chen Xian joined the sect, he's never grown a spirit plant that got less than a high-grade rating. It's really incredible. As the discussions continued in low tones, Chen Xian stood there with a tranquil, indifferent expression on his face. However, deep in his eyes burned a proud and lofty air. Elder Zhu could see how pleased Chen Xian was. He had long since been keeping an eye on him, considering how gifted he was when it came to growing spirit plants. Xian, what type of plant did you grow this time? Elder Zhu asked warmly. Elder Zhu, I and Pulse am happy to report that I grew spirit winter bamboo with that. Chen Xian waved his hand, causing 10 stalks of spirit winter bamboo to appear. Each one was as thick as an arm, and over 2 meters long. They were emerald green, and even flickered with a faint green glow. I first soaked the seeds in a spirit spring, then ground some spirit stones into gravel to act as soil. Next, I fed the plants with my own spiritual energy at least every 6 hours. Every 3 days I would carefully tend to their leaves, and I even used Nina Green's profound magic I mastered, as well as other medicinal plants to grow them to this level. Very good, said Elder Zhu, stroking his beard. praise in his eyes was clear. These stalks of bamboo are over 2 meters long and pulse with green energy. They exceed the high-grade mark and can be classified as extreme high-grade. I encourage you to keep working hard. If you can grow the bamboo to over 3 meters, then they will be classified as superior grade. When the surrounding outer sept disciple heard the words extreme high grade, even more discussions broke out, and numerous envious gazes were cast in the direction of the spirit winter bamboo. A smile broke out on Chen Xiang's face, and the lofty gleam in his eyes intensified. He clasped hands and bowed, and was just about to walk over to the assistant to collect his merit points, when a cold snort suddenly rang out. Elder Zhu, disciple Zhao, you duo, also grew some spirit winter bamboo. A long-faced young man with narrow eyes suddenly appeared as he approached. He cast a glance of disdain in Chen Xiang's direction. Yao Zhao Yi duo's name in Chinese is Zhao Yi Duo. Zhao Yi Duo. Zhao is a common surname. Yi means one and Duo means more. His sudden appearance on the scene instantly caused excitement among the surrounding outer sept disciples, who all looked over at him. It's elder brother Zhao, you duo. Elder brother Zhao's skill with spirit plants and the vegetation is supposedly neck and neck with Chen Xiang's. Well now, get to see them face off. They've been rivals for some time now, and both of them want to be known as the #1 botanist among all the disciples. Chen Xiang's expression immediately darkened. He looked coldly at Zhao Yu duo, who glared back at him. The hostility in their eyes instantly intensified. Zhao Yu duo, go ahead and take out your spirit winter bamboo, Elder Zhu said encouragingly. Apparently, even he was interested in finding out what was going to happen. He was well aware of the competition between the two young disciples, and was in fact happy to see it. It was only by means of healthy competition that great advancement could be made. Zhao Yi duo clasped hands and bowed to Elder Zhu, then slapped his bag of holding to produce 10 stalks of spirit winter bamboo each end, every one of which was over 3 meters long and thicker than a person's leg. They were bright emerald green and even seemed somewhat crystalline from the spiritual energy they emanated. It was clear that they were beyond normal, and also far above Chen Xiang's in terms of quality. The mere sight of the bamboo sent the crowd into an uproar. Most people had heard that spirit winter bamboo could grow longer than 3 meters, but had never seen it before. Spirit winter bamboo 3 meters long. I wonder how long it took to grow. That spirit winter bamboo has reached the point where it's emanating spiritual energy. Elder brother Zhao's ability with plants definitely puts him as the #1 outer sept disciple on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Seeing how excited the crowd was, Zhao Yi duo smiled provokingly at Chen Xiang. Chen Xiang's face immediately darkened. As for Elder Zhu, his eyes gleamed with praise as he looked at the bamboo and then nodded. Excellent, excellent. Quite a few disciples have handed in spirit winter bamboo today, but yours is definitely the best in terms of quality. It isn't high grade. It and the pulse as definitely superior grade. Very, very good job, Zhao Yi duo. Keep up the good work. Zhao Yi duo once again bowed to Elder Zhu, then looked over challengingly at Chen Xiang. Junior brother Chen, it seems you need to put some more work into your studies. Chen Xiang's expression grew even darker, and he snorted coldly. Isn't it a bit early to gloat, elder brother Zhao? After all, it doesn't count when you have someone helping you. Next time, you'll definitely grow the spirit winter bamboo to 5 meters tall. Hearing this, Zhao Yi duo laughed heartily. Junior brother Chen, if you talk yourself up too much, you're bound to crash and burn. Spirit winter bamboo is extremely hard to grow because of the incredible amount of spiritual energy it requires for key condensation. Disciples like us, growing it to 3 meters is the absolute limit of the limit, and you think you're going to grow it to 5 meters. Only foundation establishment elders would do something like that. That's not even to mention 6 meters in. All the years I've been in the sept, I and Oppose, we never even seen 6 meter tall spirit wind. Before Xiao Yiduo could even finish speaking, booming thuds could be heard from the path leading up to the mission's office, as if some enormous creature were approaching instantly. The elder sect disciples turned in shock, whereupon gasps began to ring out. The standoff between Xiao Yiduo and Chen Xian was also interrupted, and both of them frowned and looked over toward the path. Soon what became visible were the tops of several stalks of enormous bamboo, bigger than a person. They were a bright emerald green, and if you looked closely, you would even see some violet sparks flickering on their surface. They also emanated a splendid, multicolored glow. Even more shocking was the powerful spiritual energy emanating off of the bamboo, which instantly led to cries of shock. What is that stuff? It looks like some kind of tree, but at the same time, it also looks like bamboo. Chen Xian and Xiao Yiduo were frowning and coldn, and opposed to even identify what it was they were looking at. However, they could tell that it was something incredible off to the side. Elder Zhao's eyes were wide as he stared at the bamboo, and he even began to pant slightly. Everyone stared as more and more of the bamboo became visible. When the bamboo was completely revealed, shockingly, its stalk was 15 meters tall, and it was being carried by a petite young man, who was currently panting as he trudged up the path, the bamboo slung over his shoulder. He almost looked like an ant carrying a steamed mantle. Every step that he took resulted in a booming thud, and as he walked along, the outer sect disciples made way for him, shocked by how strong he appeared to be. The young man was of course Bai Ziaokan, who had been grumbling to himself the entire way about the brutality of the competition and the horror of 10,000 Snakes Valley. Although he wanted to cry, no tears would come, and as he trudged along, he didn't even notice the crowd of people looking at him. When he reached Elder Zhu, he tossed the bamboo down onto the ground, which resulted in a huge boom. Then he sat down on top of the bamboo, huffing and puffing a bit as he wiped the sweat from his brow. I coldn and opposed to fit this bamboo in my bag of holding, man. I and oppose am totally worn out. Oh, hello elder, I'm here to hand in this mission. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaokan got an odd feeling, and looked around to find everyone in the crowd staring at his bamboo. Gasps could even be heard. Bamboo, that stuff is actually bamboo. It and the poles are so big, I've never seen bamboo that big before. Come on, they must be trees, right? Chen Xian and Xiao Yiduo couldn't conceal their astonishment as they realized what they were looking at. However, they almost coldn and opposed to make themselves believe it was true, and knelt down to inspect the bamboo more closely. Xiao Yiduo began to tremble, and had to resist the urge to try and break open one of the bamboo stalks to examine it from the inside. Before he could, Elder Zhu trumped over, and then waved his sleeve, sending Chen Xian and Xiao Yiduo tumbling off to the side. Then Elder Zhu stood there, staring at the bamboo with wide eyes. After a long moment, he took a deep breath and said, this really is Spirit Winter Bamboo. The surrounding outer sect disciples gaped in shock for a moment, and then burst into an uproar. And quite Spirit Winter Bamboo, I can and oppose to believe those big trees are actually Spirit Winter Bamboo. How is that even possible? How could Spirit Winter Bamboo get so thick? Heavens, they're actually 15 meters long. 15 meters and as thick as a person. That's bamboo. The sounds of the uproar grew even louder as people began to compare Bai Ziaokan's bamboo with that of Chen Xian and Xiao Yiduo. Previous chapter. Next chapter. 00 Chapter 28. Bai Ziaokan gaped in shock at the commotion. Chen Xian and Xiao Yiduo, apparently completely oblivious to the pain caused by Elder Zhu tossing them aside, rushed back toward the bamboo, and knelt down to examine it. Elder Zhu began to study the stalks of bamboo one by one, his expression that of shock and elation. Everyone's crazed reaction left Bai Ziaokan somewhat alarmed in his mind. These people were acting like lunatics. It was just bamboo, after all, right? Besides, he had originally planned to grow it to a total of 30 meters before turning it in. Bai Zialgan took a few steps back and then tried to get the elder's attention. Elder, he cried loudly. Wonderful, amazing, Elder Zhu said, laughing as he began to caress each and every inch of the bamboo. Apparently, he hadn't even heard Bai Zialgan speaking, and the quad spirit winter bamboo like this is extremely rare. Only by growing it to 15 meters can it achieve such a deep green color. In fact, at this point, it and oppose as not a medicinal plant, but rather the primary ingredient to forge spirit bamboo swords. It can even be used to cast certain unique magical techniques. Listen up, everyone, take a deep breath. Looking very excited, Elder Zhu closed his eyes and breathed in deeply through his nose. Can you smell that fragrance? It smells like flesh and bone, right? That and oppose as the unique aroma that appears after this type of bamboo reaches 15 meters. Chen Xiang and Zhao Yiduo earnestly followed suit. The other disciples in the area also pressed forward to do the same. Bai Zialgan cleared his throat. He had noticed that same aroma as he was carrying the bamboo down the path. However, he was pretty sure that it was actually the aroma of chicken bones. After all, he had buried several hundred spirit-tailed chicken skeletons in the spirit field, where he had grown the spirit winter bamboo. Furthermore, those bones had all been stripped clean of their meat by none other than him. By now, Bai Zialgan was thoroughly convinced that these people were crazy. Elder, he cried out again. However, it was at this point that a violent tremor ran through Elder Zhu. Flames of rage sprang up in his eyes, and his expression twisted with rage. Damn it, what the hell happened here? Someone actually bit a chunk out. Spirit winter bamboo is extremely bitter and can't be eaten raw. What bastard actually bit a chunk out and ruined the quality? Elder Zhu seemed to be filled with grief. To him it was like discovering a perfect piece of beautiful jade only to find one part that had been destroyed by pests. His head suddenly whipped up to look at Bai Zialgan. It wasn't me, Bai Zialgan blurted, backing up nervously. He suddenly thought back to the first time he had been struck by incredible hunger in his desperation. At not having anything to eat, he had taken a bite out of one of the stalks of bamboo. How could he ever have imagined this would be the terrifying scene that would result when he went to hand in the mission, or how that single bite would affect these lunatics? When the surrounding disciples heard what Elder Zhu said, they peered over toward the last of the spirit winter bamboo stalks, and sure enough, there was a big bite mark clearly visible. Elder Zhu stared at the damaged portion of the bamboo, then let out a long sigh. After all, he was a foundation establishment cultivator, and was obsessed with the Tao of medicines. However, this bamboo that Bai Zialgan had brought was so shocking and so different from anything Elder Zhu had ever seen before that he had lost his composure just now. Finally, he took a deep look at Bai Zialgan, then flicked his sleeve. This bamboo is extreme super grade. No, wait, supreme grade. Yes, list it as supreme grade. The reward is 10,000 merit points. The audience gasped in response. The usual reward for plant growing missions was usually about 10 merit points at the most. One might be able to get 100, but in this case, the reward was 10,000. Off to the side, the assistant gaped in shock. For years and years, it had always been a rarity to have a spirit plant listed. Off to the side, the assistant gaped in shock. For years and years, it had always been a rarity to have a spirit plant listed as supreme grade. In fact, this was the first one in hundreds of years. Bai Zialgan was very excited, and immediately walked over to the assistant and handed over his identity medallion. The assistant hesitated for a moment, then looked over at Elder Zhu, who was still studying the bamboo, then gritted his teeth, and gave the merit points to Bai Zialgan. Having acquired his merit points, Bai Zialgan quickly turned to leave, determined to never come back and deal with these lunatics ever again. However, Before he could leave, Elder Zhou suddenly called out, "Hey, what's your name?" "Bai Xiaogan," was the immediate response. "I and Apples am Bai Xiaogan, and my uncle is Li Qingwu." For coming here, he had been completely unaware that the bamboo would cause such a scene, and he was actually a bit worried about that, which was why he pulled out Li Qinghao's name as sort of a threat. HMPH, Elder Zhou seemed to be irritated that Bai Xiaogan would resort to dropping Li Qinghao's name. "You might think you're pretty clever, but the Spirit Stream sect is one of the great sects with a long history. There are always disciples who come along with their secrets and their unique good fortune. I won't lower myself to the level of asking for the specifics of how you grew this bamboo, but next time you grow something similar, you make sure to bring it all to me. I'll make sure you get a nice reward of merit points." Finally, he waved his hand to dismiss Bai Xiaogan, then went back to studying the bamboo. It was at this point that, because of the matter with the bamboo, the entire mission handover event concluded. Bai Xiaogan clutched his identity medallion firmly in hand as he hurried away from the mission's office and then headed directly toward Fragrant Cloud Peak's Spirit Medicine Pharmacy, which was where disciples could acquire spirit medicines. It was also where disciples could hand over spirit medicines that they had crafted, and thus earn merit points. Bai Xiaogan sped over at top speed, then hurried around the spirit medicine pharmacy trying to choose what to buy. Eventually, he decided to purchase a bottle of medicinal pills suitable for the 5th level of ki condensation. These medicinal pills were by no means cheap. Bai Xiaogan had originally assumed that 10,000 merit points was allowed, but unexpectedly, the spirit medicines were actually very expensive. "Gringed spirit gathering pills," he murmured, looking at the medicinal pill bottle he held in his hand. Inside were 3 medicinal pills, which had cost him fully 4,000 merit points. However, these were pills that ordinary ki condensation disciples would usually not have access to. They were quite extraordinary. Not only was their medicinal strength greater than that of ordinary spirit medicine, they could provide pure spiritual energy. Bai Xiaogan wasn't convinced that merely stepping into the 5th level of ki condensation would be enough, so he planned to break through all the way to the great circle of the 5th level. He had thought about aiming for the 6th level of ki condensation to avoid having to fight in the competition, but if he did that, he could well imagine how Li Qingwu would come up with some other method of punishing him. As for the rest of his merit points, he didn't and opposed to let them go to waste. He traded them for some disposable defensive talismans. With those hidden in his robe, he felt much safer. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough merit points to go through with his plan of heading to the treasure pavilion to acquire a weapon or two suitable for the ki condensation stage. Instead, he headed back toward his residence. Once back in the courtyard, he sat down cross-legged in his log cabin, then pulled the medicinal pills out and studied them closely. "I still have 3 months to go. It's time for some secluded meditation." Gritting his teeth, he looked around to make sure no one was watching, then performed an incantation gesture and pointed out instantly. The turtle walk flew out, along with a bunch of spirit tails, which he used to start a 3-colored flame. 1 tail feather wasn't and opposed to enough to satisfy the turtle walk. He had to feed in 10 before the 3 designs on the walk lit up brightly. Then he took a deep breath and put the 3 medicinal pills inside to perform a 3-fold spirit enhancement. After the process was completed, the Gringed spirit gathering pills in his hand had 3 silver designs covering their surfaces. Finally, he placed one of them in his mouth. The medicinal pill dissolved, and spiritual energy began to course through him explosively. Bai Xiaogan instantly began to utilize the breathing techniques and the postures of the Violet Cauldron control art, using them to manage the flow of the spiritual energy. A few days later, rumbling sounds filled Bai Xiaogan's log cabin and numerous dust particles blasted out in a shock wave. Moments later, by the Alcan, and a pause, as laughter, could be heard ringing out. "Fifth level of key condensation," he said, panting, eyes shining brightly. After eating so many spirit-tailed chickens recently, his cultivation base had already reached the great circle of the fourth level of key condensation. By eating that one medicinal pill, he was able to easily break through into the fifth level. More filth was expelled out from inside of him, but not as much as before. After washing up, he didn't immediately take out another medicinal pill, but rather took time to stabilize his cultivation base. After 5 days passed, he took out the second of his threefold spirit-enhanced green spirit gathering pills, and consumed it as the spiritual energy coursed through him. The river that was his spirit meridian grew larger and flowed faster, causing his cultivation base to climb higher at a rapid rate. After stabilizing himself for a few more days, he consumed the third Gringed spirit gathering pill, and his cultivation base shot up to the great circle of the fifth level of key condensation. By this point, everything about him seemed different than before. His skin was fairer, and there was something unique about his energy. Bai the Alcan was quite happy, but also realized that normally speaking it would be impossible to use only 3 medicinal pills to break through from the great circle of the fourth level of key condensation all the way to the great circle of the fifth level, and then be only a hair away from reaching the sixth level. As far as he could tell, the only reason he was able to do so was the turtle walk and its spirit enhancement ability. The more Bai the Alcan practiced cultivation, the more obvious it was to him how helpful the turtle walk was. That in turn caused him to become even more curious about its origins. Although it looked like a turtle shell, the more he studied it, the more it seemed that it wasn't. In recent days, he had looked more into the matter of spirit enhancement, and had learned that Violet Cauldron Peak was known for their spirit enhancement abilities. In fact, if you paid enough merit points, you could even acquire the services of the elders there to perform spirit enhancements. Word had it that the peak, Lord of Violet Cauldron Peak, was a grand master when it came to spirit enhancements. Running his fingers along the designs that covered the turtle walk by, the Alcan's eyes glittered. Finally, he shook his head. There were too many things he didn't understand, and it wouldn't and opposed he do any good to waste time thinking about them. Reaching his hand out, he caused the green jade pendant and his wooden sword to appear. These were the only magical devices he owned at the moment. Gritting his teeth, he produced some more spirit tails, as he prepared to perform threefold spirit enhancements on them. I wonder what the wooden sword and jade pendant will look like after I do the threefold spirit enhancement. The wave of a hand caused the 3 designs on the turtle walk to light up. When he sent the jade pendant flying inside, silver light shone, and rumbling sounds like that of thunder could be heard. Thankfully, they didn't echo out very far, so nobody heard them. When the silver light faded away, the green jade pendant had 3 silver designs on it which flickered brightly for a moment before fading away. However, the Alcan could sense that the jade pendant's aura was now as different from before as the heavens were from the earth. In fact, it was even possible to see glowing violet sparks within the grain of the jade pendant. Even the shape of the pendant had changed. Instead of being oval, it had now been flattened into a circular shape. The Alcan poured some spiritual energy into it, causing rumbling sounds to echo out as a green shield sprang up around him, fully a meter thick, and completely astonishing to behold. Previous chapter. Next chapter. 00 or chapter 29. After performing a quick test on the defensive power of the jade pendant, the Alcan couldn't help but laugh out loud. Next, he turned his attention to the wooden sword. He had acquired this wooden sword the moment he had joined the sect, and since then had performed spirit enhancements on it twice. With the protective power of this jade pendant, after I perform a threefold spirit enhancement on my little wooden sword, it'll definitely be Completely extraordinary, Isaac smiled, then began to prepare the little wooden sword for the spirit enhancement. Silver light flickered within the turtle wall as it faded away. The little wooden sword appeared in front of Isaac. 3 silver designs gleamed on its surface, then gradually faded away. At the same time, the physical appearance of the sword changed. It was longer by a finger's length, and the grain of the wood was now virtually completely violet. There was also a bizarre aroma, which pulsed out of the sword, an aroma which, upon entering the nose, seemed sweet, but quickly caused the mind to enter a state of confused distraction. Isaac trembled for a moment, but then his eyes grew clear. He looked in shock at the wooden sword for a moment, then reached out to grab it, whereupon he found that it was many times heavier than before. Unexpectedly, as he held it in his hand, it felt as heavy as a boulder. Eyes glittering, he examined the sword, and gradually a profound gleam rose up in his eyes. This wooden sword is made from the rarely seen Havicloud wood, he murmured, which only needs to be refined for 49 days, before you can use it in equipment forging. It can also be used in mass production. Next, he focused on the veins in the wood of the sword. Violet veins. There's only one explanation for that. After performing this handful of spirit enhancements, these are the signs of the sword's transmogrification. Isaac closed his eyes and began to review the information about Havicloud wood that he had gleaned when studying about plants and vegetation. After a while, his eyes opened, and they gleamed with anticipation. He performed an incantation gesture, and then tapped the little wooden sword, which instantly caused a black light to flicker out, within which were tiny violet specks. Suddenly, the sword shot out of the log cabin across the courtyard, and then another 30 meters or so, where it stabbed into a huge boulder. Without making a single sound, the sword then spun around inside of the rock, pierced out of it, and flew back to Isaac. The sword wasn't damaged at all, and in fact began to emanate a piercing aura. Isaac's expression brightened. He played around with the sword a little bit more, then once again painted over the designs. Finally, he opened the door of his log cabin, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Unfortunately, as soon as he thought about the competition in 2 months, his previously high spirits sank a bit. This isn't an apology good enough. I'm still not well enough prepared. The other people in the competition are definitely going to be vicious beasts. I need to do more. Grinding his teeth, he thought about the 2 levels of the Violet Key Cauldron control art, which he had read about in the manual. Lightness in heaviness, heaviness in lightness. Those 2 levels of the Violet Key Cauldron control art were powerful magics that appeared when cultivating the art. If both were cultivated to the pinnacle, they could lead to a divine ability called Violet Key Cauldron summoning. On the south bank of the spirit stream sect, the fundamental techniques of the Violet Key Cauldron control art were something that virtually everyone practiced. However, few people cultivated the lightness in heaviness. And as for the second stage of heaviness and lightness, that was even more rare. As for those who cultivated the art to the absolute peak, and could unleash the Violet Key Cauldron summoning divine ability, they were most rare of all. Actually, the majority of those who gained enlightenment of Violet Key Cauldron summoning were disciples from Violet Cauldron Peak. Lightness in heaviness only by reaching the stage of being able to completely control physical objects can I even be absolutely assured of rising above the pack. Isaac continued to think about the description of the technique as he gazed down at the little wooden sword. Back when he had fought his battle with Zubikai, everyone from the supervisor's department and even the ovens had mistakenly assumed that he had gained enlightenment of lightness in heaviness. Now that he thought back to the situation, an idea flickered through his mind. The reason people thought I had achieved lightness in heaviness was because of how adeptly I controlled my little wooden sword. However, the real reason behind that was mostly because of how incredible the sword became after my spirit enhancement. The truth of the matter is that my ability to control it isn't actually that incredible, and definitely is not lightness in heaviness. Frowning, Isaac randomly sat down cross-legged and looked at the wooden sword. Gradually, his eyes grew blank and were soon shot with blood. A moment later, his right hand suddenly waved up into the air, sending the little wooden sword flying out. It whistled through the air in front of him, kicking up a cloud of dust. Isaac frown deepened as his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then pointed his finger out. However, what he pointed at wasn't the sword, but rather the huge rock outside the courtyard that he had just stabbed with the sword moments ago. The wave of his finger caused the huge stone to tremble slightly, then gradually rise up into the air by about 1/3 of a meter. But then Isaac spiritual energy grew unstable, and it thumped back down with a boom. Isaac was not dismayed, though in fact, quite the opposite. His eyes began to shine brightly. Focusing completely, he circulated his spiritual energy and once again waved his finger. Once, twice, 3 times. Time passed. Half a month was gone in the blink of an eye. Virtually that entire time, Isaac worked on trying to control the boulder. Of course, this boulder was about as tall as 3 people put together, and weighed about 1,500–1,600 kilograms. Despite the fact that Isaac was already in the great circle of the 5th level of key condensation, manipulating an object like this was not an easy task. The only reason Isaac could do so was because of the extraordinarily refined state of his cultivation base. Anyone else in the 5th level of key condensation would never be able to move the boulder more than a handful of centimeters. Isaac worked hard for an entire month. By this point, he realized that the reason controlling the boulder was so difficult wasn't because of a lack of spiritual energy, but rather that his level of control was lacking even when he still had plenty of spiritual energy. Connection would always break. The key is to move the threads of spiritual energy at a constant speed, he muttered hoarsely, eyes bloodshot, but shining brightly. That's how to make sure they never break. It was the same principle that applied to mortals when they were making noodles at home. If you pulled the dough apart too quickly, it would snap. If you went too slowly, it would be impossible to stretch them out very far. You had to use just the right amount of strength, and then you can control the objects smoothly and clearly however you wish. If cultivators wanted to control physical objects to a degree that surpassed the ordinary, they would need to use just the right amount of strength and maintain stability. Of course, that increased the level of difficulty significantly. I get it now, Isaac thought excitedly. Lightness in heaviness is about more than the words light and heavy. It and pulse as not just being able to control heavy objects as if they did and opposed to weigh a lot sides. Just the surface meaning. The true, deeper meaning has to do not with physical objects, but rather with the way you manipulate spiritual energy. In the 5th level of key condensation, your total reserve of spiritual energy is what makes the heaviness. When you take that spiritual energy and convert it into numerous tiny unbreakable threads, that is the lightness. Doing it correctly is lightness in heaviness, of course, with the surface meaning. The result is the speed with which you can effortlessly control physical objects. After getting to the root of the problem, he waved his hand again, and the boulder began to tremble. Then it suddenly rose up into the air. It was almost as if some enormous hand had simply grabbed it and pulled it up. Then it began to whistle through the air toward Isaac. However, before it could reach him, it suddenly fell down out of the air into his courtyard, where it kicked up a huge cloud of dust. Isaac felt no discouragement. He continued to practice for another half a month. Unfortunately, for that entire time, he was unable to maintain one continuously stable thread of spiritual energy. Even when he was able to form a stable thread, the incredible heaviness of the rock ensured that the threads of spiritual energy always grew unstable and broke. Of course, when it came to controlling the little wooden sword, he had no problems whatsoever, because of the vast difference in weight between the boulder and the sword. Isaac now felt that controlling the wooden sword was much, much easier. Furthermore, after the month or more of training, he could move it with much greater speed. In actuality, he really had achieved lightness in heaviness. However, he wasn't unopposed satisfied. Eyes completely bloodshot, he gritted his teeth, and that vicious determination once again appeared. I refuse to believe I can unopposed to do it. He performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, causing the boulder to fly over and hover directly above him. Beads of sweat popped out on his forehead as he looked up nervously at the rock, exerting all the possible effort he could muster to preserve that invisible thread of spiritual energy. After all, if it broke, then the rock would fall. Although it wouldn't kill him, it would definitely be very painful. This time, he was clearly able to maintain the connection for a lot longer than before. However, after about an hour passed, rumbling sounds began to echo out, and then Isaac let out a yelp as the stone smashed down. After a long moment it trembled and fell off to the side, as Isaac crawled out from underneath it. Thanks to his undying skin, he wasn't hurt. However, the pain of what had just occurred left him grimacing. Despite that, his resolve grew even more intense. Another month went by, and the rock smashed down onto him over and over again. Eventually, he reached the point where he could actually keep it afloat for an entire day without dropping it. Furthermore, the height to which he could lift it grew greater and greater. Soon, he could hold it 30 meters high in the air. Of course, the pain that resulted when he dropped it from that height left Isaac completely pale-faced. However, that was the only way to refine himself to the pinnacle. Gradually, his ability to achieve lightness in heaviness with his internal spiritual energy was growing more and more stable. Eventually, he reached the point where he almost never broke the connection. However, he still wasn't satisfied. Next, he didn't practice while sitting cross-legged, but instead while exercising. That made things even more difficult, and led to continuous booms ringing out in his courtyard. Time passed one day at a time. Soon the competition Li Kingo had mentioned was now only 3 days away. The scene in Isaac courtyard was that of a figure zipping around, while a 1,500-kilogram boulder floated around up above. Despite how much Isaac was moving around, the boulder remained motionless up in the air. Eventually, Isaac stopped running around and stood there in front of his log cabin, laughing heartily. Then, he waved his right hand, causing the boulder to fly out of the courtyard and settle back firmly into the ground. Next, he performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing his little wooden sword to slash out in front of him. It moved so quickly it was little more than a blur. Clearly it was much more powerful than before. Isaac's face lit up with delight, and his hand began to flash with incantation gestures. The speed combined with the might of the sword, resulting in a shocking combination. All of a sudden, the courtyard almost seemed to be filled with innumerable little wooden swords, all flying about. In the end, he flicked his sleeve, causing the sword projections to vanish. Only one wooden sword remained, which then shot back toward Isaac and vanished into his bag of holding. Now, I finally feel ready to get into the top 5. Isaac took a deep breath. Although he didn't feel 100% confident, time was running out. All he could do was settle his ki and calm his mind, then sit down cross-legged to meditate and put himself in the proper state. Previous chapter. Next chapter. 00 or chapter 30. 3 days later, dawn. Isaac's eyes opened at sunrise. He took a deep breath, and a serious expression could be seen on his face. This was his first time taking part in a competition like this. His fight early on with Zhu Bikai actually didn't and opposed to really count as much of a battle. However, now that he was going to participate in Fragrant Cloud Peak's outer sect competition, he would be truly fighting against his fellow sect members. He slowly rose to his feet, organized his bag of holding, and then soberly walked out of his residence. Moments later though, he came running back and started rummaging around under his bed until he found the leather coats he still had from back in his days at the ovens. After donning several layers, he then placed his jade pendant somewhere he could access it easily. Were it not for the fact that it would have led to too many questions, he would have put his turtle walk on his back. Oh, why didn't I think of this earlier? He thought regretfully. I can't oppose to believe I forgot about that big black walk of mine. However, he was running out of time and had no choice but to grit his teeth, turn, and leave, taking a glance in the direction of the distant sun. His eyes filled with determination. Puffing his chest out, he began to climb toward the top of the mountain. At the moment, he was wearing far too many layers of leather clothing. Even though he didn't have the big black walk on, he still looked somewhat like a sticky rice dumpling. He was bundled up so tightly that after walking for only a little bit, he was already starting to sweat. However, even if he sweat more profusely, he wouldn't shed even one item of clothing. The competition was too important, and he could and opposed. He stopped thinking about how brutal it would be. As he walked along the path, he suddenly realized that it was quite a foggy morning on the mountain, and he actually had no idea where exactly he was. Did I take a wrong turn, he thought, and instantly looked around for someone to ask directions from. At the same time, his heart began to thump from the fear of possibly being late. At the top of Fragrant Cloud Peak was a fighting arena, which was where the competition was to take place. Quite a few people were already gathered there to watch the proceedings, and were chatting in hushed tones. There were even some disciples in the audience, who were in the 5th level of Ki condensation, although most of them stood there with arms folded across their chests, as they looked at their junior brothers and sisters, who would be participating in the competition. Of course, there were also people there to cheer on their friends. This outer sect competition wasn't very formal, but it was a place where the participants could stand out from the crowd. There were about 20 people who had come to join the competition, all of whom were sitting in the area cross-legged in meditation, preparing in earnest for the fighting to begin. No one in the competition was in the 3rd level of Ki condensation, although the rules allowed for that. Most of the people who actually joined the competition were in the 5th level of Ki condensation, although there were 5 or 6 who were in the 4th level. There was one young woman among the group who stood out from everyone else. She was tall and beautiful, and her outer sect disciple uniform could not conceal her courageous form. Anyone who laid eyes on her wouldn't be able to stop from slipping into a bit of a reverie. Her skin was white like snow, and she had eyebrows that curved as gracefully as willow leaves. She really was spectacularly beautiful. As for the Taoist trousers she wore, although they were loose, they stretched tightly around her rear end in a way that made it virtually impossible for any man to look away. There were quite a few outer sect disciples clustered around her, obviously her admirers. Although she couldn't quite compare to Zhu Xingqi, she was still one of the most famous of the outer sect disciples, Du Lingfei. Yao. Du Lingfei's name in Chinese is Du Lingfei. Du Lingfei. Du is a common surname. Ling means to rise up, Fei means luxurious. Elder sister Da's cultivation base is in the great circle of the 5th level of Ki condensation, so she'll definitely take first place in this competition. There is not even any suspense in the matter. You can't underestimate elder brother Chen Xiang. Though I heard that he had a cultivation base breakthrough last month, he might not be in the great circle of the 5th level of Ki condensation, but he and oppose as close. Standing not too far away from Du Lingfei was an arrogant-looking young man, the same Chen Xiang who had been shocked by the Elkins bamboo outside the mission's office that day. Even as everyone was discussing the matter, Chen Xiang looked over at Du Lingfei with a strange gleam in his eyes. Although he wasn't too confident in being able to take first place, he was pretty certain he could take second. Besides, he might also be able to take advantage of the situation to get to know Du Lingfei a bit better. It was at about this point that two beams of light whistled through the air from off in the distance. It was none other than Li Qingwu, followed by an emaciated old man. The old man had swarthy skin, but his eyes shone brightly, and he seemed like a very strict person. The surrounding outer sect disciples were completely shocked to find that Li Qingwu would be in attendance at the competition, and quickly clasped hands in greeting. Greeting, Peak Lord. Greetings, Elder Son. Everyone was flabbergasted that the Peak Lord would personally come to an event like this. Small competitions like this were almost always presided over by Elder Son. Du Lingfei and Chen Xian were also shocked, and had very serious expressions on their faces, as they bowed in greeting to Li Qingwu. Li Qingwu looked around benevolently, nodding as he scanned the crowd of disciples. However, he frowned when he realized that Bai Xiaogen wasn't there. When the surrounding outer sect disciples saw Li Qingwu frowning, their hearts began to thump. Du Lingfei instantly began to get nervous, unsure of why the Peak Lord might be displeased. Shall we begin? Peak Lord asked Elder Son, who stood next to Li Qingwu. Li Qingwu was just about to reply, when all of a sudden, a sweat-soaked spheroid shape could be seen speeding toward them from off in the distance. I got lost, cried Bai Xiaogen, as he ran along. It was too foggy. Not only was Bai Xiaogen very nervous, he also felt that the whole situation was very unfair. After all, he wasn't very familiar with all the mountain paths, and considering how foggy it had been, he had simply gotten lost while thinking. As soon as the words left his mouth, all of the outer sect disciples involuntarily looked over. There were quite a few of them who were familiar with Bai Xiaogen, and when they heard the words he called out, they began to snicker. As for those who didn't and opposed to know him, they frowned, and gleams of derision could be seen in their eyes. As far as they were concerned, the only reason he could have for getting lost on the way to the competition was that he rarely ventured up to the top of the mountain, and didn't and opposed to care much about the competitions that the sect held. Most likely, he was only used to strolling around for pleasure. Du Lingfei looked at him, and remembered him as one of the people who had been chasing after Zhou Xingqi recently. Supposedly, he had worked hard to catch the Great Chicken Bandit. Du Lingfei immediately turned away in disdain, not willing to even look at him. Chen Jian looked at Bai Xiaogen in complete shock, and could and opposed to help, but glanced over at Li Qingwu, hadn, and opposed to forgotten what Bai Xiaogen had said at the mission's office about Li Qingwu being his uncle. That would explain why Li Qingwu had been frowning right now. And after analyzing the matter, he realized that when fighting Bai Xiaogen, he would have to be careful not to beat him too badly. Li Qingwu snorted coldly, glaring at Bai Xiaogen for a moment before nodding at Elder Son. Elder Son looked thoughtfully at Bai Xiaogen for a moment, then laughed and waved his sleeve. Very well, all disciples who wish to participate in the outer sect fighting competition, please step into the arena. Seeing Li Qinghao's glare caused Bai Xiaogen to feel more than ever that the situation was completely unfair. However, he didn't dare to give voice to his sentiments. As soon as the words left Elder Son's mouth, Bai Xiaogen was the first disciple to leap up onto the platform, chest puffed out proudly, looking as though mountains of daggers and seas of flames couldn't impinge on his honor. Soon, all the contestants were in the arena, including Bai Xiaogen. There were 20 in total. The rules for competitions like this one were fairly lax. Elder Son looked at the contestants for a moment, then pulled out a small cloth sack within which were a collection of marbles with numbers on them. One by one, the competitors filed over to take a marble, which would indicate the order in which they fought. Bai Xiaogen didn't, and opposed he managed to get first in line. He got stuck in the middle, and when he pulled out his marble, it had the number 11 written on it. Very well, elder son said coolly. Now, everyone step back so that the first match can begin. Fighters number 1 and 2 prepare to begin by the Alcan, and the others quickly left the fighting arena, whereas the disciples with the number 1 and 2 marbles remained as the two stared each other down. Brilliant light began to shine in their eyes. Soon they began to fight, and the booming sounds of battle rang out. Meanwhile, the Alcan's mind was racing. He kept telling himself that considering there were 20 people in this competition, all he had to do was win twice to make it into the top 5. He was also wondering who it was that got the number 12 marble, but no one was willing to reveal to everyone else which numbers they had, making it virtually impossible for him to determine who he would be fighting. Even as his spirits began to fall, the first match ended, and the second began. Du Lingfa was one of the fighters in this match, and he immediately performed an incantation gesture, causing a banner to fly out, which then turned into a stream of mist that enveloped her opponent. After struggling a bit, the disciple Couldn, and paused to escape, and conceded, filled with admiration for Du Lingfa. The third and fourth matches went by quickly enough, and when it came time for the fifth match, Chen Jiang secured a quick and efficient victory over a disciple in the fourth level of Ki condensation. Fighters number 11 and 12 stepped forward and let the match begin. Elder Son called out. Bai Xiaogan took a deep breath and walked forward, a very serious expression on his face. After setting foot into the arena, he found that his opponent was a tall, gaunt young man with a cold smile on his face. His cultivation base was extraordinary in the fifth level of Ki condensation. His eyes flashed like lightning, and overall, he seemed like the type of person who was not to be trifled with. Well, junior brother, the gaunt young man said, his voice cold, you have the bad luck to have run into me in the first round. It and oppose, as not too late to concede. If you don't, you'll have to take responsibility for yourself if you get injured. However, in the instant that the words left the young man's mouth, Bai Xiaogan suddenly let out a powerful roar. The roar was so intense that everything shook, and quite a few audience members were shocked. The gaunt young man was also taken aback, and even backed up a bit, without even thinking about it, staring at Bai Xiaogan with wide eyes. After roaring, Bai Xiaogan slapped his jade pendant, causing a green glow to surround him. That didn't leave him feeling safe though, so he pulled out a big stack of paper talismans, which he rapidly stuck all over himself. Each time he did, they would emit a powerful glow until he was covered with no less than 10 individual shields. Their combined power transformed into a protective wall nearly a meter and a half thick from a distance. The sight was completely shocking. Because of all the protective shields, Bai Xiaogan's subsequent shout was actually a bit muffled. All right, bring it on. The gaunt young man was still staring blankly at Bai Xiaogan, and it wasn't just him. The other elder sect disciples, including the other contestants, were all gaping in shock. In all the times they had observed competitions like this, they had never seen anyone use protective shields to such an extent. Li Tinghao's face twitched, but from the look in his eyes, it was clear he could do nothing about the situation. Chen Jiang took a deep breath as he grew even more certain that Bai Xiaogan and Li Qingwu were actually relatives. However, Du Lingfa simply gave cold harumph, and her duration increased. Everyone watched with wide eyes as the gaunt young man down in the arena let out his own roar, then performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing a wooden sword to fly directly toward Bai Xiaogan. Previous chapter. Next chapter. 00 or chapter 31. The gaunt young man's wooden sword pulsed with a strange energy, streaking through the air in a prismatic beam, directly toward Bai Xiaogan. However, before it could even get close, a pinging sound rang out from the exterior of Bai Xiaogan's thick meter-and-a-half shield as the wooden sword bounced off of it. As soon as Bai Xiaogan's protective shields flickered, his eyes glittered, and he breathed a sigh of relief, clearing his throat. He actually just sat down cross-legged. The audience exchanged confused glances. They weren't really sure what to say in response to Bai Ziaokan and his extreme level of defense. They had seen people who focused on defense before, but had never seen anyone who shielded himself this much. As for his opponent, the young man's face first flushed, then went pale, gritting his teeth. He roared, sending his flying sword shooting toward the glowing shields, ratcheting up in power even as it shot through the air. A pinging sound rang out as the flying sword flew in again and again, but each time it was sent spinning away. Finally, the pale-faced young man's spiritual energy was more than half depleted, and a look of despair appeared on his face. He had been fighting in duels for years, but this was the first time he had encountered an opponent who hid like a turtle in a shell. However, he wasn't willing to give in yet. He had joined the competition with the express purpose of taking third place. Staring at Bai Ziaokan with bloodshot eyes, he furiously roared, "Get out from behind that shield!" Bai Ziaokan wasn't scared at all by this young man, so he didn't have any reservations about staying behind the shield and shouting, "If you're good enough, why down and oppose till you come on inside." Strange expressions appeared on the faces of everyone in the audience as they looked at Bai Ziaokan, not sure whether to laugh or cry. The gaunt young man was so angry that blue veins popped out on his forehead as he clenched his jaw. Finally, he bit his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. When it landed on his wooden sword, the entire thing turned the color of blood. Discussion immediately broke out in the audience. Blood spirit magic. For him to use that magical technique shows that he really has been driven to madness. The blood-colored wooden sword moved even faster than before and emitted double the pressure. Blood-colored light spread out in all directions as it shot toward Bai Ziaokan. A boom rang out as the wooden sword pierced a full 3 inches into the shield. Rumbling could be heard as it tried to pierce further, but failed. In fact, because too much force was being exerted, cracks began to spread out over the sword. A moment later, a pop could be heard as the entire wooden sword shattered into pieces, which slowly floated down to the ground. The gaunt young man's eyes went wide, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. His spiritual energy was vastly depleted, his magical item destroyed, and he was so furious, he simply passed out. As Lei King watched the scene playing out, his face grew increasingly unsightly. Chuckling wryly, Elder Sun stepped forward, signaled for people to come carry the gaunt young man away, and then declared Bai Ziaokan the winner. "Oh, he let me win," Bai Ziaokan said as the shield light around him faded away, looking very solemn. He puffed his chest out and clasped his hands behind his back, looking every bit like a chosen. As for the gaunt young man, as he was being carried off, he apparently heard Bai Ziaokan and paused afterwards, regained consciousness, coughed up another mouthful of blood, and then passed out again. Clearing his throat, Bai Ziaokan turned to Elder Sun and clasped hands. Then he flicked his sleeve and walked out of the arena. The elder sect disciples, who had come to watch the competition, took everything in fairly well. At most, they had strange looks on their faces. As for the contestants, they were looking at Bai Ziaokan with very unsettling expressions. That was especially true of the people who had already won their respective matches. When they compared the gaunt young man's current condition with Bai Ziaokan, they couldn't help but feel the need to be on guard. The competition continued, and soon the rest of the matches were completed. Of the original 20 participants, half had been eliminated to produce the current top 10. That included Du Lingfei, Chen Xian, and Bai Ziaokan, who stood there, chin stuck up, looking around at his fellow top 10 competitors. Inwardly, he was saying, "All I have to do is win one more match, and then you'll have succeeded." Seeing hope right there in front of him, he felt quite excited. Elder Sun looked over the 10 contestants, his gaze lingering on Bai Ziaokan for a moment, before saying, "The top 5 will now be selected. Would the 10 of you please step forward to select your marbles?" This time, Basialgan scrambled to be first in line, and pulled out a marble with the number 2 written on it. Afterward, he immediately turned to study his fellow competitors. It didn't take long for everyone to draw a marble, after which Elder Sun announced that the first fighters were to begin their match. The Alcan was joined by a burly, muscular man, who, upon seeing who he was fighting, began to laugh loudly. Other people might fear your defenses, but I don't care at all about them. I and Oppose am also adept with defense. So let and Oppose us just wait and see which of us two can hold out for longer. Laughing, the man slapped his bag of holding, produced a small bicolor. After emptying it with some spiritual energy, the bicolor grew larger and began to emit a yellow glow, which completely surrounded the man. The man wasn't an aposty done yet, though, roaring, his flesh and muscles expanded, and he even grew a few inches taller. The entire scene was quite shocking. I can't believe it, and oppose as body forging magic. That bicolor looks familiar. Don't tell me it's a dawn-like bicolor. That thing costs 9,000 merit points. Everyone was shocked, and as for Baixiaogan, his brow was furrowed. When Elder Sun saw what was happening, he nodded his head slightly, eyes shining with a look of praise. Turning to Lei Qingwu, he said, "This kid is Li Shan, 5th level of key condensation. He'll be a difficult opponent, as he was born with godly power, plus cultivates the body forging magic. Not only is he incredibly strong, he also excels in defense." Lei Qingwu nodded slightly, then looked over at Baixiaogan. Baixiaogan was studying the burly man's transformed body and the shield he had. He recognized the shield from his visit to the treasure pavilion, and although he wasn't an apostle sure exactly how many merit points it cost, his frown deepened. Everyone watching the competition seemed very interested to find out what was going to happen, especially the other disciples in the competition, who were clearly pleased to gloat in the misfortune of others. That fair-skinned disciple sure got unlucky. Well, he got super lucky before that and opposed us all. Now that he and opposed us facing a powerful opponent like this, he'll naturally get beaten back into place. As the audience discussed the developments, the burly man smiled viciously, and then began to stride rapidly toward Baixiaogan. "There's nothing you can do. I beat the last disciple. I fought without even drawing a weapon. My fist is the most powerful magical technique I have." The man spat up, causing a wind to blast out. As he closed in, Baixiaogan's eyes glittered, and he suddenly waved his finger, causing his little wooden sword to fly out from his bag of holding. Without the slightest pause, it shot out in front of Baixiaogan toward the burly man. As it slashed toward him, sword ki built up for dozens of meters around the sword, causing rumbling sounds to echo out. The burly man's face fell, and his scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode. His eyes widened as an intense sensation of crisis washed through him. Without the slightest hesitation, he fell into retreat. Roaring, he waved both hands, sending his bicolor out to block the sword. A boom rang out as the wooden sword and the little bicolor slammed into each other. However, the color didn't do anything to even slow down the wooden sword. It was blasted apart, and the wooden sword continued on toward the burly man. The man's face was filled with shock. Even if he were capable of dodging faster, it would do no good. The flying sword was on him in the blink of an eye, causing an icy wind to buffet his face. "I concede," he shouted without hesitation, his voice rising by a few octaves as he fell to the ground. A buzzing sound could be heard as the wooden sword stopped just in front of the man's forehead, then turned and flew back into Baixiaogan's bag of holding. Baixiaogan blinked, also somewhat shocked by the wooden sword. Before, he had only practiced with it, and had no idea it was so powerful. And that was before he even began to utilize lightness in heaviness. After looking up in thought for a moment, he stuck his chin up, clasped his hands behind his back, and looked coolly at the burly man. The man's face was pale white, and yet he still didn't and opposed he seemed to want to back down, crawling to his feet. He glared at Baizialgan and said, "Using the power of magical items doesn't count as winning. I don't accept this as being a defeat." With that, the man turned and stalked out of the arena. Elder Sun looked over at Baizialgan, also astonished by the power of the wooden sword. However, he didn't say anything other to announce that Baizialgan was the victor. Ha ha ha, Baizialgan laughed to himself. In the next battle I'll just instantly concede. I became a cultivator to live forever. Right, all this killing and fighting is too barbaric. That's not how Baizialgan does things. Baizialgan left the arena, feeling wonderful at having complied with Li Qinghao's requirement to get into the top 5. Li Qinghao's eyes had also come to rest on Baizialgan. Although everyone else had been focused on how incredible the flying sword was, Li Qinghao hadn't been paying attention to that at all. He had been watching the skill and ease with which Baizialgan controlled the flying sword. Seeing that Baizialgan had won another match, the crowd began to sigh emotionally. "Oh, this guy must be rich." That and Paul's asked why he had such an incredible wooden sword. HMPH, if he had any other weapon, he'd definitely COULDN, and opposed to have one. Magical devices have nothing to do with your cultivation. First he used those amulets, then that sword. What a waste. He's definitely going to go broke eventually. The grumblings didn't and opposed to last for long though. The next battle soon got underway. Du Lingfei was fighting an opponent with an extraordinary cultivation base. It was a fierce fight. But Du Lingfei didn't and opposed to use her banner instead. She utilized a flying sword. They fought back and forth in dazzling fashion until suddenly Du Lingfei's flying sword shot forward with incredible speed to appear directly in front of her opponent. Such speed vastly surpassed that which ordinary disciples could control, sending the audience into an uproar when people realized what they were seeing. "I can't believe it," and opposed as lightness in heaviness. Du Lingfei has actually reached enlightenment of that stage. Its lightness in heaviness deep within Elder Sun's eyes, the glitter of approval could be seen as he looked at Du Lingfei. Li Qingwu also nodded. Chen Xiang was shocked, and most everyone else who had made it into the top 10 had similar reactions. As for her opponent, he chuckled bitterly and clasped hands to concede. Du Lingfei stood there in the arena, looking around proudly, clasping hands toward Li Qingwu and Elder Sun. She left the arena. The crowd was still in an uproar. However, Baizialgan was left standing there, blinking. That level of speed counts as lightness in heaviness, he thought, astonished. As Du Lingfei proudly left the arena, light drops of sweat could be seen running down her face. Despite being in the great circle of the 5th level of Qi condensation, fighting 2 successive battles was quite a drain on her spiritual energy. That was especially true of the battle just now, in which her opponent had possessed unusual battle prowess. In the end, she had been forced to unleash her magic of lightness in heaviness, which was an even bigger drain on her spiritual energy. That was how she had secured victory. Her goal was first place, and she knew that subsequent opponents would only be more powerful because this particular sect competition wasn't very strictly organized. She wouldn't have much time to rest before the next fight. Therefore, she immediately pulled out a medicinal pill, which she consumed, then closed her eyes and began to take advantage of the time to recover. The top 5 now consisted of Baizialgan and Du Lingfei, as well as Chen Xiang. In the end, there were 2 other young men, both of whom had profound cultivation bases in the 5th level of Qi condensation. Currently, everyone was in the process of rotating their cultivation bases, taking advantage of every opportunity to replenish some spiritual energy. Only Baizialgan didn't seem to have spent any spiritual energy at all. In fact, he even stood off to the side yawning when everyone else who had been eliminated from the competition saw that. It left them with the urge to beat him. Now that he had fulfilled Li Qinghao's demand to get into the top 5, he didn't care at all about the rest of the competition. Trying to suppress his boredom, he looked over at the other four top 5 competitors, especially Du Lingfei, musing that if the speed she had just unleashed counted as lightness in heaviness, then he was surely far, far beyond that. It's too bad. She has such an extremely murderous aura. Why would a good girl like that be so into fighting and killing? Don't tell me that all girls who practice immortal cultivation are weirdos like this. Zhu Zinqi is super proud, and Hu Xiaomai is way too moody. Bai Xiaogan shook his head. He was just about to look away from Du Lingfei when she seemed to sense that he was looking at her. Her eyes suddenly snapped open to stare at him coldly. As far as Du Lingfei was concerned, Bai Xiaogan wasn't, and opposed to even worth thinking about after watching his first 2 battles. She was of the opinion that he had pulled off lucky wins, which caused the duration in her heart to grow stronger. Well, you dare to stare at me, do you? Bai Xiaogan immediately ceased any motion of looking away. Instead, his eyes went wide as he glared right back at Du Lingfei. Daring contests didn't have anything to do with fighting and bloodshed, so from a young age he had met few people who could overcome him. Du Lingfei frowned. As for the admirers who clustered behind her, they were very irritated and cast ferocious glares in his direction. However, seeing so many eyes staring at him, and considering that quite a few of them were extremely fierce, Bai Xiaogan cleared his throat. He only had 2 eyes, so how could he possibly match up? Well, they have numbers on their side, and besides, true men don't fight with girls. With a harem, he looked away. About that time, Elder Sun's voice rang out across the arena. Very good, all of you. This competition has gone very well so far, and now we will continue to narrow down the competitors. Would the 5 of you please step forward and select a marble? One of those marbles is a free pass into the top 3. Smiling, Elder Sun produced the bag again. This time, Chen Xiang was first. After pulling out the marble, he frowned. His marble had the number 4 written on it. Du Lingfei was next, who got the number 2 marble. The other 2 outer sect disciples got numbers 1 and 3 respectively. Bai Xiaogan didn't even need to draw a marble. The remaining marble was the free pass. Bai Xiaogan's eyes lit up and he chuckled, took his place outside of the fighting arena, arms folded, feeling completely relaxed as he prepared to watch Du Lingfei and all the others. He hadn't even planned to continue on with the competition, but now he didn't have to do anything and he was already in the top 3. Luck is a big part of strength, he thought, feeling quite pleased with himself. That very luck caused quite a few audience members to stare at him with even stranger expressions on their faces. Most of them really couldn't bear to accept the situation, especially the other disciples who had been eliminated, whose hearts were filled with jealousy and envy. This guy is totally shameless. Alright, fine. He used a magical item to get into the top 5, but then he actually got a free pass into the top 3. How despicable. In fact, there's never been someone as despicable as this to ever show up in the competitions. Previous chapter. Next chapter.